The room was already charged before the words left his mouth. Fluorescent lights hummed above, cameras blinked red, and the long oak table stretched between power and accountability. Kah Patel leaned forward, elbows planted, voice sharp enough to slice through the murmurs. "Congresswoman, you're twisting the law again." The air shifted. It wasn't just the insult. It was the certainty in his tone, the practiced smirk that followed. He said it like a man too used to being unchallenged, too sure the room would nod along. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She didn't blink. Her eyes locked on him, steady, unreadable. Behind her, an aide froze mid-note. A photographer's camera clicked once, then hesitated, as if afraid of breaking the silence that followed. Everyone expected her to flinch, to fire back, to meet heat with heat. But she didn't. She simply exhaled. Slow, controlled. The narrator's voice lowers, almost a whisper. Everyone expected her to back down. But no one expected what came next. Patel leaned in farther, sensing the stillness as weakness. "We're here to discuss the truth," he continued, tone dripping with condescension. "And it's time you stop bending it to fit your narrative." A few chuckles rippled from his side of the aisle. Reporters exchanged looks, pens ready. The hearing room, so used to noise, suddenly felt smaller, tighter, as if holding its breath. Crockett's hand hovered near her microphone, not trembling, waiting. Her eyes moved slowly from Patel's smug face to the chair in front of her and then to the gallery. The weight of the moment gathered like a storm behind her silence. And then she spoke. Her voice didn't rise. It steadied, calm, direct, surgical. The kind of tone that made people sit up because they realized they were about to witness something that would outlive the news cycle. Every camera in the room adjusted. Every whisper stopped. The narrator's tone sharpens. What she said next didn't just shut him down, it sent shockwaves far beyond that room. In that instant, the hearing wasn't just about policy anymore. It was about power meeting its mirror, and the silence before her next words. It was the sound of history clearing its throat. What the cameras captured that day was only the surface of the spark before the fire. Beneath the exchange, beneath the glare of studio lights and polished microphones, something deeper was unraveling. This wasn't just another committee hearing. It was a reckoning. The topic on the docket: legal accountability, the boundaries of justice, the misuse of power disguised as principle. For months, Kah Patel had built his brand on certainty. Every television appearance, every headline, he stood as the self-proclaimed defender of truth. He wrapped himself in the flag of legality while twisting its fabric behind the scenes. To his followers, he was the insider who knew how the system really worked. To his critics, he was the man who had turned truth into theater. The narrator's voice cuts in, deliberate and sharp. For months, Patel had painted himself as a truth-teller, but today, that mask began to slip. The hearing had begun with standard questioning, procedural language that barely concealed political tension. But as Patel spoke, his words turned from defense to deflection. He wasn't explaining law anymore. He was weaponizing it. His statements came laced with contempt for anyone who dared to interpret the law through empathy or equality. He used facts the way a magician uses mirrors, to distract, distort, and dominate. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett saw it for what it was. To her, law wasn't a shield for the powerful. It was a promise to the people. She knew the difference between those who sought justice and those who sought control. Her patience wasn't silence. It was calculation. The narrator's tone deepens. This wasn't just about legal definitions. It was about the soul of justice itself. As Patel continued, his words grew louder, his hands slicing through the air as if volume could replace validity. Each accusation dripped with performance. "You keep citing fairness," he sneered, "but fairness doesn't mean rewriting the law for your side." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Crockett's allies shifted uncomfortably, but she remained composed, her expression unreadable. She had seen this pattern before: men who confuse aggression for authority, who mistake calm for weakness. Outside that hearing room, America was watching. Immigrants who had once been told they didn't belong. Women who had been spoken over in boardrooms. Young voters who still believed that truth could triumph if someone dared to speak it plainly. To them, this wasn't just a clash of opinions. It was a battle over who gets to define integrity. Crockett's stillness became its own kind of power. She let him talk. Every sentence he fired only built the stage for her reply. The narrator's voice grows intimate, pulling the audience closer. She knew something he didn't, that the louder he grew, the more the law itself seemed to whisper in her favor. Behind the cameras, a producer mouthed to a technician, "Keep rolling." Everyone could feel the shift, the tightening of air before the storm. Patel's tone turned mocking now. "Congresswoman, maybe if you read the law instead of rewriting it, we wouldn't be wasting time." His smile widened, expecting laughter. He got silence instead. Crockett finally raised her eyes. Her hand moved toward the microphone. The motion was slow, deliberate, graceful. It wasn't the gesture of someone preparing to argue. It was the movement of someone about to redefine the battlefield. Her voice hadn't yet risen, but the entire room leaned in. The narrator's voice lowers into suspense. And when he went too far, she decided it was time to remind him what the law actually means. The cameras zoomed. The next words would decide who truly understood justice and who merely performed it. The camera pans across Kah Patel's polished suit. Perfectly measured smirk. The air of someone who's been here before and expects to own the room. For years, Patel has crafted his image as a truth warrior, a former national security aide who knows the inner machinery of Washington, a man who speaks in absolutes and carries his own definition of loyalty. But today, that confidence teeters on something thinner, a rehearsed bravado that no longer convinces anyone paying close attention. He wasn't always like this. Once he was the quiet strategist behind the scenes, careful, calculated, and deliberate. But television studios have a way of changing people. Under the bright lights, Patel learned that certainty sells better than complexity, and that volume often outshines nuance. Each appearance made him bolder. Each round of applause made him louder. Soon the calm analyst had vanished, replaced by a performer, a man who mistook defiance for truth. As his fame grew, so did his conviction that he couldn't be wrong. He began to treat hearings like stages, microphones like swords, and opponents like props in his narrative. Every exchange became a chance to prove he was the smartest man in the room, or at least the loudest. Reporters called him fearless. His followers called him honest. But those who saw through the act knew better. Because behind that polished confidence was something else, a deep insecurity that demanded constant validation. His voice, sharp and unyielding, wasn't a reflection of inner strength, but of desperation to stay relevant. When he interrupted witnesses or mocked lawmakers, it wasn't strategy. It was performance art, designed to distract from the hollowness behind his words. He treated hearings like boxing rings, the narrator intones, voice dark and deliberate. Truth wasn't a pursuit, it was an opponent. The montage continues, clips of Patel sparring with journalists, dismissing questions, spinning half-truths into headlines. Each soundbite crafted for outrage, each gesture fine-tuned for virality. But as the narrative unfolds, so does the irony that a man who claimed to defend justice now stood accused of distorting it. The audience begins to feel that subtle discomfort that comes when charisma and arrogance blur together. The man who once wielded power through certainty now seems fragile under the weight of his own ego, and across from him, in this hearing room, sits the one person who sees through it all. Jasmine Crockett, silent, poised, eyes steady. She's not impressed by his titles or intimidated by his tone. Where he thrives on noise, she commands stillness. Where he performs, she calculates. The tension crackles like static between them. He leans forward, certain his words will dominate the moment. She doesn't move. The balance of power shifts, invisible but undeniable. Arrogance, the narrator concludes, always carries a blind spot, and he was sitting right across from him. Cut to black, the silence before the storm. The hum of the hearing room fades into the soft echo of memory, a different world, a different kind of fight. Long before the headlines, long before the cameras, there was Jasmine Crockett, a girl from the South who learned early that fairness wasn't a guarantee, and that silence was never neutral. She grew up watching how people with less were told to settle for less opportunity, less voice, less justice. But even as a child, Jasmine never accepted that equation. Her teachers remember the spark, the girl who always had her hand up not to show off, but to ask why. Why does one voice carry more weight than another? Why do some truths get buried while others are broadcast? Those questions didn't fade, they hardened into conviction. In college, she majored in political science, driven by a belief that the law wasn't just a system, but a language, one that could either silence people or set them free. She chose the latter. Law school wasn't easy. Nothing about her journey was. There were late nights, quiet doubts, and the familiar chill of doors closed to those who looked like her or spoke too plainly. But Jasmine had a habit of building her own doors. When doors were closed, the narrator says softly, she learned to build her own. As a young public defender, she saw the justice system up close, not as words in textbooks, but as human stories: a teenager punished for poverty, a mother fighting for dignity, a man wrongly accused with no one to stand beside him. In cramped courtrooms and crowded hallways, she became a voice for the voiceless, unshaken even when the odds were impossible. Her clients didn't have headlines. They had lives, messy, fragile, worth defending. That's where she learned composure, not as a performance, but as survival. She discovered that true power wasn't in shouting, but in standing firm when others tried to make you small. Each case sharpened her resolve. Each injustice reminded her that the law wasn't broken. It was being bent by those who treated truth as negotiable. And that's what made her dangerous to the powerful. When she finally entered politics, it wasn't because she craved the spotlight. It was because she was tired of seeing people ignored by those who claimed to represent them. She didn't enter politics for applause, the narrator says. She entered because silence had gone on too long. The transition was anything but smooth. Congress is no place for the timid. Every word is measured. Every glance is strategy. Every misstep becomes ammunition. But Crockett adapted the way she always had by doing the work others avoided. While others chased cameras, she read case law. While others postured, she prepared. While they shouted, she took notes, quietly assembling the truth piece by piece. Her strength wasn't in how loud she could speak, but in how unshakable she could remain when the room turned hostile. Her colleagues noticed. Even her critics did. The same composure that once made her an outsider began to make her unstoppable. Behind the calm smile was an iron discipline, the product of every courtroom, every late night, every time she'd been told she didn't belong. She knew what it meant to be underestimated, and she also knew how to turn that underestimation into an advantage. The camera cuts to her face in the hearing room, the same calm, unreadable stare that once disarmed prosecutors and bullies alike. Patel may have come armed with bluster and talking points, but Crockett came armed with something rarer, truth she could defend. Word for word, her calm wasn't a weakness, the narrator says, voice steady. It was focused. The scene builds flashes of her past intercut with the present, her walking through courthouse corridors, defending clients no one else would take. Standing before Congress, her voice clear, precise, unflinching. She's not here to win arguments. She's here to remind people what justice sounds like when it's not being shouted over. As Patel leans forward in the hearing room, his words sharp with accusation, Jasmine doesn't flinch. Her fingers tap once against the desk, a quiet rhythm of patience and calculation. The same rhythm that guided her through law school, through trial after trial, through years of proving that intellect could be stronger than intimidation. And that preparation, the narrator whispers, was about to collide with one of the loudest voices in Washington. Cut to black. The sound of her breath is slow, steady. The storm hasn't started yet, but everyone can feel it coming. The gavel strikes once. The room exhales. The hearing resumes. Kah Patel leans forward, the confidence of a man used to winning in sound bites. His voice slices through the murmur of the chamber. "Congresswoman," he begins, tone dripping with feigned courtesy, "you've once again managed to twist the law to fit your political agenda. Impressive, if dishonest." The air tightens. Jasmine Crockett doesn't move. Her pen rests between her fingers still. She looks at him, not with anger or assessment. Around the table, aides glance up from their notes. Reporters lift their cameras. The tension is thick enough to hum. He smirks. She waits. He pushes again. She doesn't flinch. "See, this is what's wrong with Congress today," Patel continues, voice rising. "People like you treat legal precedent like a buffet. Pick what tastes good. Throw away the rest. That's not justice. That's manipulation. He thinks he's landed it. You can see it in the way he leans back, lips curling into a self-satisfied half-smile. A few allies nod, but the rest of the room, the ones who've watched Crockett before, know better. Crockett's eyes narrow just slightly. She doesn't reach for her mic yet. She lets silence do its work, a silence that stretches, bends, and begins to turn against him. Patel clears his throat, filling the void. "What's wrong, Congresswoman?" "No defense this time?" Her voice, when it comes, is calm enough to cut glass. "Oh, I was just waiting for you to finish rewriting the law again." A flicker of laughter ripples through the back rows. Patel's jaw tightens. Crockett continues, tone steady but scalpel sharp. "You keep accusing others of twisting the law, Mr. Patel. But from where I sit, you seem more interested in twisting the truth because it's harder to debate facts than to distort them." The rhythm shifts. Her words are clean, measured. Each one lands like a gavel strike. "The law isn't a weapon, sir. It's a record, and records don't lie, even when politicians do." He shifts in his seat. "With all due respect." "With all due respect," she interjects, voice firm now, "respect is earned through honesty. And honesty isn't something that bends depending on who's under oath." Gasps. Someone drops a pen. The camera zooms closer and Patel's expression freezes, caught between irritation and disbelief. She keeps going, not shouting, not gloating, just teaching. "The point of this committee isn't to play defense for your party. It's to uphold the Constitution. I've read it cover to cover." "Have you?" The smirk fades. The silence grows again, but this time it's his. "Everyone expected her to lose composure," the narrator murmurs. "But the storm never came from her." Crockett glances at the chair, then back at Patel. "You talk about law as if it's a tool for control. It isn't. It's the only equal ground left, the only thing that doesn't care about who's shouting the loudest." The room is still. Even the air feels suspended. Patel tries to recover. "That's a fine speech, Congresswoman, but it doesn't change the facts." "Oh, it changes everything," she says quietly. "Because the facts were never on your side." Just the volume, it's not a yell. It's a whisper that lands like thunder. For a moment, the lights seem harsher. The cameras click in staccato bursts. Patel blinks, mouth half open, the words he planned dissolving into silence. The chair clears his throat. "Order, please." But order has already been restored, not by authority, but by clarity. Crockett leans back slightly, the faintest trace of a smile ghosting her face. Patel looks down at his notes, realizing too late that his own rhetoric had become his undoing. She didn't raise her voice, the narrator says, tone low, reverent. She raised the standard, and as the tension slowly releases, one truth hangs heavy in the air. She hadn't just answered him, she'd exposed him. The camera lingers on Patel's face, the same man who once treated hearings like arenas. Now he sits in the silence he built for someone else, because in that room, under those lights, Jasmine Crockett hadn't just won the argument, she had rewritten the balance of power. Fade to black. The room went quiet. For a heartbeat, even the air seemed to hold its breath. Cameras whirred, reporters paused mid-note, and the murmurs of aides faded into a collective anticipation. Kah Patel, accustomed to dominating every exchange with volume and posture, leaned in slightly, expecting hesitation. But none came. Jasmine Crockett remained composed. Her eyes were steady, her posture unshakable, her hands resting lightly on the desk. She didn't lean forward. She didn't raise her voice. She simply waited, letting the tension mount, letting the silence stretch until every ear in the chamber was attuned to what she might say. Then she spoke. Her voice was calm, measured, and deliberate. Every word landed like a precision strike rather than a barrage. "Mr. Patel," she began, each syllable crisp and authoritative, "the law isn't a tool for convenience or political gain. It is a standard, a guide, and a covenant to the people we serve." The narrator's voice slowed, almost reverent. It wasn't anger that destroyed him. It was precision. She leaned slightly toward the microphone, not to amplify, but to assert clarity. "When you accuse me of twisting the law," she said, letting each word hang, "you overlook the statutes themselves, the precedents established, and the moral logic embedded in every principle we uphold. You can't call it twisting when it's written in black and white." The room reacted. Gasps echoed across the chamber. A few aides stiffened, then subtly hid smiles behind their hands. Reporters scribbled furiously, knowing they had witnessed a moment that would echo far beyond this room. Even some of Patel's allies leaned back, uneasy, sensing that the argument they thought they controlled was slipping like sand through their fingers. Patel attempted to regain control. "Congresswoman, with all due respect," but Crockett didn't falter. Her voice, calm but unyielding, cut through the interruption like a scalpel. "With all due respect, Mr. Patel, respect is earned through understanding, not volume. The Constitution is clear. Article Y grants powers precisely to prevent this kind of distortion. And if you will allow me to quote, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people." A hush fell over the room. The quote wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a mirror reflecting every overstatement Patel had made, every assumption he had carried into the hearing. His shoulders stiffened. For the first time, his words sounded uncertain. "See," the narrator intones, voice low and deliberate. Truth had entered the room, and volume had nowhere to hide. Crockett continued, slowly articulating each point with surgical precision. She cited statute after statute, precedent after precedent, illustrating that her interpretation wasn't opinion, it was law itself, faithfully observed. She connected each legal principle to moral reasoning, demonstrating not just what the law said, but why it mattered, to safeguard fairness, equality, and accountability. Her pauses were intentional. Each one allowed the weight of her words to settle. She didn't rush. She didn't punctuate with drama. She let the facts resonate, letting the room and Patel absorb the inevitability of her argument. Patel tried again, sharper this time, the smirk replaced with visible frustration. "Congresswoman, that's a clever interpretation," but Crockett interrupted, soft but piercing. "Cleverness doesn't determine legality. Clarity does, and the law is clear. Every claim you've made today relies on misdirection, not precedent. Facts don't bend for convenience, Mr. Patel. They exist independently of performance. The cameras captured it all." His confident posture wavered, his voice cracked slightly. Colleagues exchanged looks. Reporters sensed the shift. Even his own notes, once cradled like shields, seemed insufficient against the relentless force of her calm certainty. And with one sentence, the narrator continues, rising in crescendo, she restored what he had tried to corrupt, the dignity of the law. Crockett didn't need to shout. She didn't need to mock. The magnitude of her authority was in her restraint. Every pause, every carefully chosen word was a reminder. The law is not a tool for theatrics. It is the backbone of accountability, and it cannot be dismantled by bluster or bravado. Audience reactions layered over one another, subtle gasps, the scratch of pens against paper, restrained nods, and a few suppressed smiles. For a moment, time slowed. The hearing room, usually alive with chatter and posturing, had transformed into a theater of justice. Patel's attempts to respond grew increasingly disjointed. Words he had prepared seemed hollow, unanchored. The longer Crockett held the floor, the more his confidence eroded. Even as he stammered, the narrative had already shifted. The focus was no longer on his accusations, but on her unwavering adherence to principle. Her final words landed like the gavel itself. "Let the record reflect. The law serves the people, not the performance. And anyone who attempts to twist it for convenience will find it immutable as it was written, as it was intended, and as it must remain." Silence followed. It was not empty. It was the silence of recognition, of realization, of something immutable triumphing over something ephemeral. Truth had spoken. Volume had fallen still. The narrator's voice rises one last time. In that room, under bright lights and the weight of expectation, history quietly took note. And what happened outside that room, the ripples, the echoes, the viral shockwaves, would be even louder. Crockett leans back, hands folded calmly. A faint knowing smile touches her lips. The moment has passed, yet it reverberates not because of fury or spectacle, but because dignity, precision, and unyielding adherence to principle never truly fade. The audience, both present and far beyond, understood. This wasn't a simple rebuttal. It was a masterclass in authority, A reminder that truth, when wielded with patience and clarity, can silence even the loudest voices. And as Patel's gaze flickered between notes, scripts, and reality, it was evident the law had spoken, and he had finally heard it fade out, leaving the room charged with reverence tension, and the quiet thrill of justice restored. But what happened outside that room would be even louder. It started with silence, a single electrified second after Jasmine Crockett's final words. Then came the avalanche. Cameras blinked awake, microphones clicked on, and by the time Patel had gathered his papers, the moment had already escaped the room and entered history's bloodstream. The clip hit social media before the gavel fell. Aid recorded, phone shaky, raw, the kind of footage people believe more than official transcripts. Within minutes, hashtags bloomed like wildfire. Chris Crockett clapback, where law and grace was truth in session. The hearings live stream, once crawling with a few thousand viewers, spiked into six figures. Across America, living rooms, cafes, and subway screens lit up with the replay. The sound that filled them wasn't shouting. It was composure measured, calm, and unbending. Jasmine's tone cut through the digital chaos like a lighthouse through fog. News anchors scrambled to catch up. In a hearing marked by tension, one declared, Congresswoman Crockett's response to Kah Patel may go down as one of the defining moments of this term. Another network looped the line. You can't call it twisting when it's written in black and white. The phrase turned into a mantra, quoted, clipped, memed, and turned into t-shirts before the night was over. Twitter, now X, hummed with the chorus of validation. She said what we've all been waiting to hear. That's how you handle arrogance with facts, not fury. Finally, someone reminding them the Constitution isn't a prop. Even Patel's own supporters hesitated. A few tried to defend him, blaming media spin. But their replies were buried under thousands of comments from citizens. Lawyers, teachers, and students united in one sentiment. She stood for the law, not the noise. Talk shows turned it into a segment, the calm before the clapback. Analysts replayed her tone, her timing, the subtle power of restraint. One body language expert said, she didn't just win the argument. She controlled the air in the room. By dawn, major newspapers ran op-eds titled When Dignity Spoke Louder Than Arrogance, and The Woman Who Made Congress Listen. Cable news ran her closing words on repeat. Even late-night comedians picked it up not as a punchline, but as a moment of poetic justice. In Dallas, a teacher streamed the clip in her civics class. Watch this, she told her students, because this is what holding power accountable looks like. One student, wide-eyed, whispered, she didn't even yell. The teacher smiled. She didn't need to. There was something cleansing about the moment, a quiet defiance that reminded people why truth matters. It wasn't about political parties anymore. It was about posture versus principle, about who stands tall when the air turns heavy. Meanwhile, in Patel's camp, the damage control began. Aides drafted statements, rehearsed clarifications. He was taken out of context, they said. He was misunderstood. But context was the one thing the internet didn't forget. Every frame, every pause, every flicker of confidence breaking it was all there. Archived, replayed, immortalized. By afternoon, even some of his allies began to distance themselves. It was not his strongest moment, one admitted on live TV, hesitating before the word not. The clip of that hesitation went viral too. In contrast, Crockett remained silent. No victory lap, no tweet storm. Just a brief message from her office. The law speaks for itself. 8 words, and they landed heavier than any press conference. The silence became part of her mystique. Commentators called it strategic grace. Supporters called it power. In truth, it was authenticity. A refusal to cheapen the moment that had already said everything that needed saying. Clips of her response began appearing in unexpected places. Political ads, social campaigns, even university lectures on rhetoric and leadership. Someone synced her words to orchestral music. Another set it to slow motion, turning it into a cinematic montage of composure, triumphing over ego. And through it all, that one line kept echoing, you can't call it twisting when it's written in black and white. It was more than a comeback. It was a cultural reset. a reminder that integrity could still trend, that calm could still conquer chaos. The narrator's tone softens. When the noise faded, what remained wasn't scandal or spectacle, it was faith. Faith that truth, when spoken without fear, still finds its way to the center of the stage. And somewhere, scrolling through their feed, millions of viewers felt the rare moment when politics became personal again. When one voice carried what so many had wanted to say but never could. The hashtags might fade. The clips might get buried under tomorrow's headlines. But something fundamental has shifted, because this wasn't just a takedown. It was a turning point. And as the country replayed her words again and again, one question began to rise above the applause, above the noise, above even the silence. If dignity can win once, what's stopping it from winning again? In a world where volume often masquerades as strength, Jasmine Crockett's victory felt like something rare, a reminder that truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. The moment she chose restraint over rage, she redefined what power looks like in the age of noise. The narrator's voice slows, reverent yet steady. Crockett didn't win by shouting louder. She won by remembering what the law was built for. The law, at its purest, isn't a weapon or a trophy. It's a mirror reflecting who we claim to be, and who we actually are when the cameras stop rolling. In that hearing, surrounded by bright lights and political theater, Crockett held that mirror steady. And for a moment, the entire nation saw its reflection. She reminded the country that justice isn't about ego or allegiance. It's about the fragile, sacred idea that everyone, no matter their title or tone, stands equal before the truth. Her calm wasn't passivity. It was precision. Her restraint wasn't weakness. It was mastery. The narrator continues, the tone deepening. In every era, arrogance meets its reckoning, and truth finds its voice. From the courtroom steps of the civil rights movement to the quiet offices where women drafted the arguments that reshaped equality law, America's moral spine has always been strengthened by people who refuse to play the loud man's game. People who understand that sometimes the strongest act of defiance is simply refusing to match the noise. Crockett's reply that day wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a recentering, a quiet insistence that the rule of law still matters, that integrity still has weight, and that facts are not subject to personality. As the narrator speaks, the imagined scene returns, her pen resting on the desk, the silence stretching between her words. In that stillness, something bigger than politics moved. It wasn't about Patel anymore. It wasn't even about that committee room. It was about what happens when truth stops retreating, when it stands its ground, calmly, unflinchingly, and lets arrogance collapse under its own echo. She didn't need to gloat, didn't need to replay her own words. Her silence afterward said what millions understood instantly, that dignity isn't silence born of defeat, it's silence that knows it already won. And that is what struck the nation. In a time where outrage sells and humility rarely trends, Jasmine Crockett showed that real authority comes not from dominance, but from discipline, not from theatrics, but from truth delivered without fear. Her story became more than a viral clip. It became a modern parable that whispers to every viewer scrolling past, you don't have to scream to be powerful. You just have to stand for something that lasts. The narrator's tone turns reflective, almost intimate. Perhaps that's why her silence afterward spoke louder than his words. Because in that silence, there was history, the weight of every person who's been told to quiet down, to step aside, to let the loud ones decide what truth sounds like. And for once, silence wasn't submission, it was sovereignty. The final lines linger like the echo of a heartbeat. In the age of noise, truth doesn't compete, it endures. And when it finally speaks calmly, clearly, undeniably, the world remembers why it matters. The music fades, the screen dims, but the message remains, glowing quietly in the minds of those who heard it. Integrity is not outdated. Composure is not weakness, and justice, when spoken with grace, is still America's loudest voice. Kah Patel accused Jasmine Crockett of twisting the law, but in the end, she reminded America what law really means. That one calm, measured response became a lesson in integrity, a demonstration that truth doesn't need volume to command attention. Throughout the hearing, Crockett embodied the principle that defending justice isn't about theatrics or ego. It's about clarity, composure, and the courage to stand firm even when every eye is watching, every camera is rolling, and every expectation is stacked against you. Truth defended with grace carries a weight that no shout can ever replicate. In times when noise drowns reason, voices like hers remind us the Constitution doesn't need defenders who shout. It needs believers who stand, those who are willing to let facts, fairness, and moral clarity speak louder than self-interest or arrogance. If you believe the truth still matters, share this video. Let it ripple beyond this room, beyond this moment, and reach every corner where civility, fairness, and justice need champions. Because respect isn't granted, it's earned, one moment of courage at a time. One voice can shift a narrative. One calm assertion can turn the tide. One person, standing for principle, can remind a nation why its laws exist in the first place. Slow fade now. Piano underscores the gravity of the moment. Cameras are dim, but the lesson lingers. This was more than a debate. It was a reminder that justice still has a voice, and sometimes that voice speaks loudest when it refuses to raise itself above the rest.